Imagine for just a second that you're standing on this massive high mountain peak. You've been watching the world below for, well, an eternity, acting as this totally detached witness to the endless repetitive cycles of civilizations rising, peaking, and then inevitably collapsing. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to step right into the shoes of the Starfinder, this cold cosmic observer who decides to become an agent of absolute chaos, looking down at a dying world. We're diving into a seriously compelling, grimdark Gothic fable that uses Nietzschean philosophy to really dig into what happens when all our societal structures completely and utterly fail. So let's jump right into the Stark universe, starting with the very first chilling observation the Starfinder makes about the people below. He drops this absolute bombshell. The fruit of your civilization is overripe. Its once vaunted sweetness has long since fermented into vinegar. I mean, wow. The Starfinder sees what the people down there just straight up refuse to admit. This whole rotting fruit metaphor, it is the perfect way to describe a failing moral order. A system might have been super nourishing once, it was sweet, but prolonged stagnation has totally ruined it. That sweetness has literally fermented into vinegar. And the crazy part is, the people are still desperately clinging to this rotting fruit. They're completely distracted while the actual foundation of their entire society is decaying right out from under them.
Which brings us to Chapter 1, The Rotting Moral Order.
So, what's actually at the core of all this decay? It's a concept called existential rot. Basically, this is the terminal decay of arbitrary human constructs that people have somehow mistakenly convinced themselves are the absolute foundation of the universe. Think about things like fancy titles, massive financial debts, or laws passed down through generations. Guys, these aren't laws of physics. They are purely imaginary values. And this is really the Nietzschean philosophical bedrock of our entire fable. People have confused the rules that they literally just made up with the inherent, unchangeable truths of the cosmos. And when those made-up rules hit their expiration date, you get this terminal existential rot.
And the way this rot actually shows up in the world is through what the fable calls golden cages. We're talking about inherited laws and birthrights, giant scrolls of financial debt, and these super rigid, arbitrary identities. And people cling to these things for dear life. Why? Because they offer this totally false sense of security that completely masks the underlying decay. But make no mistake, these cages are toxic illusions. They only exist as long as there's a functioning societal structure to enforce them. In reality, they just trap people in restrictive roles instead of providing any actual meaning, keeping them entirely distracted from the harsh cosmic reality that's about to smack them in the face.
This leads right into Chapter 2, Destructive Mercy of the Void.
Here is where we hit this incredibly haunting paradox. The Starfinder says, I have turned your world into a field of black ash, not out of malice, but to erase the rigid identities that defined you. Notice that he doesn't destroy the world out of cruelty. He's not doing this to be a villain. He doesn't stick around to rule over the ashes, and he definitely doesn't offer any comfort. Honestly, his gaze is already moving on to the next dying constellation. By turning absolutely everything to black ash, he's shattering those toxic illusions, those golden cages we were just talking about. It is, strangely enough, a destructive mercy designed entirely to liberate them.
So, how exactly does this destructive mercy play out? Well, it happens in 3 distinct steps. First up, the great silence takes hold. All the noise of civilization, all those exhausting demands of the golden cages, it just stops. Dead quiet. Second, every single societal excuse is stripped away. You can't blame your crippling debts or your supposed birthright for who you are anymore because all of those concepts have literally been incinerated. And finally, the third step, the ultimate bestowal of radical autonomy. We are completely reframing the apocalypse here, guys. It's not just the tragic end of the world, it is the ultimate, albeit brutal, path toward true existential freedom.
And that brings us to Chapter 3, Golden Cages Turn to Ash. Let's look at the parables of solitude.
To really understand this, we need to compare the old world's illusions with the harsh, stark reality of the void. Over on the left, we've got the illusions. You have a merchant holding his scrolls of debt, genuinely believing he owns the futures of 1,000 men. And you have a king clutching his inherited birthright. But on the right, when the great silence finally falls and the earth exhales its lethal breath, what's the actual reality? Well, the merchant opens his vaults and it isn't filled with gold. No. It's filled with parched lilies and black ash. And the king's birthright? It's reduced to a totally blank slate of ash where his identity has been entirely erased. It's this powerful juxtaposition of a false man-made reality against the high contrast, indifferent truth of the cosmos.
These 3 parables of solitude perfectly illustrate the really harsh awakenings these survivors go through. First, we have the merchant. His golden cage was his giant pile of debt scrolls. His awakening? Sitting all alone in the ruins, suddenly realizing his entire life's work was a toxic illusion that vanished the literal second the system collapsed. Then we have the Nameless King. His cage was that heavy, inherited crown. He's standing out in the ruins, shouting his grand titles to the empty wind, demanding the service he thinks he's owed. But guess what? The wind does not care about crowns. His awakening is feeling the sudden, crushing, nihilistic weight of radical autonomy. And finally, there's the Wanderer, who steps out into this dead underworld of ash and discovers something entirely unexpected. A true paradox of hope.
Which transitions us to Chapter 4, The Violet's Chaotic Rebirth.
So the Wanderer is out there, searching the wasteland for any sign of the world that used to be. And she finds this, right in the middle of the frozen soot, a single violet braving the cold. She actually weeps when she sees it, recognizing it as a symbol of Persephone, a flower associated with sorrow, the underworld, and death. But as the frost is literally biting at her hands, she realizes it actually stands as this incredible paradox of hope. The violet didn't need any of the old laws to exist. It didn't need imaginary value or a golden cage. It only needed the total darkness of the underworld to prompt its choice to bloom. Emerging right out of total destruction, the violet becomes the ultimate symbol of life finding a way on a completely blank slate. And that sets up our final chapter, Chapter 5, The Terrifying Freedom to Begin. This right here brings us to the ultimate incredibly heavy consequence of the void, radical autonomy. Think about what it means to stand on a blank slate of ash as the absolute author of your own completely meaningless existence. This is the cynical wisdom of the void at its peak. Without masters, without arbitrary laws, without a society constantly telling you exactly who you are totally stripped of your essence. As the philosophers would put it, you are condemned to be free. The Nameless Kyong? He isn't a king anymore. He is just a man, standing in the quiet, absolutely and terrifyingly responsible for whatever he chooses to do next. So let's pull all this together and summarize the core philosophical takeaways here, what we can call the true gifts of the void. First, there's the complete erasure of imaginary value, finally realizing that our societal constructs just aren't real. Second, the total removal of societal excuses. You literally cannot blame the system when the system has been reduced to ash. Third, the heavy burden of existential choice, moving away from active nihilism and actually taking responsibility for yourself. And finally, the terrifying freedom to begin. The true, dark mercy of the Starfinder is that by destroying absolutely everything you knew, you are forced to figure out your true value on your own.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to ponder. This fable kind of forces us to look in the mirror at our own lives. We all have our titles, our debts, our inherited beliefs. But if the Starfinder's cosmic silence were to sweep it all away today, when your golden cages finally crumble, what will you write on the blank slate of ash?